It's a noisy Saturday evening. This is the end of the first week. Week 2 of Esper's Refit. Week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6,
week 7,
week 8,
week 9,
week 10 to week 20.
Been a bloody nightmare. Tom, what are you doing today?
Go, go and go. Once more, go. We have been here for 1 whole year. It's very exciting.
Phewy.
Blimey.
Well, how about that then, eh?
That was a long time.
13 months,
Phew.
30 odd employees, a lot of blood, sweat and tears. Most importantly though, how much did it cost?
Yes, and also, where did we go wrong?
We got a lot of great feedback from you guys over the last 3 episodes, the revisits. And in fact, I think some of you even went back to the original Refit series, all 52 episodes of it. You are gluttons for punishment. I don't know how you can do that, but there we go.
Yes, and in part 1 of the revisit, we got 1,200 thumbs up and only 7 thumbs down, which I think must be a record.
I think that's a record, definitely. This episode, by the way, we are dedicating to Patrick Childress of sailing vessel Brick House, who sadly lost his battle against COVID-19 recently. And the reason why we dedicate this episode, and in fact this revisit to Patrick, is that he was a very pragmatic sailor, very down to earth, and loved the practical side of sailing. And I think the revisit of the Refit would have been right up his street. So we ask you, please guys, go to his YouTube channel. It's still up there. He's got over 60 episodes, and I know that Rebecca would certainly benefit from it. So if you get time, we've got a link in the description, and this is for you, Patrick.
Simon Benson on YouTube said, "The guys did a great job. I think she looks great. Looking forward to seeing how it's all held up and what you would do differently."
So before we break down the costs for you, let's just have a quick look at what worked. And in a nutshell, 5 years on, everything stood up pretty well, actually.
Pretty much it has, yes.
There's the usual wear and tear, of course, I suppose, but the paintwork, that's still in pretty good nick. Andre Berialt, I apologise, Andre, I know I've pronounced your surname wrong. You said, good thing you didn't choose red. It is quite a finicky pigment, very sensitive to sunlight, even if well encapsulated in resins. It will always degrade in time, much faster than any other colour.
That's true. You know, there's a red boat in the marina right now. In 6 months, it's already degraded.
So glad we stuck with the moon dust. Whilst we're on the outside of the boat, the osmosis, we pretty much killed that. Our last haul out was in Krabi 18 months ago, and there were no signs of osmosis, so that's all good. You saw us use butyl tape extensively, and also the Arbor Mast as well. Again, can't recommend that enough. That is held up. We've had no leaks in any of those deck fittings in the last 5 years.
And the integrated B&G navigation system has been superb. Totally relying on it now, and just love using it in all conditions, and during the day and during the night. It's been great. And the same has to be said for the electric. So pretty much, I think, held up throughout the boat.
Yeah, we've had no electrical issues. Samai Pata on YouTube said, particularly impressed with the wiring job, better than new. And a Patrick on YouTube also said, as a 35-year-old veteran of low voltage on boats, I will confirm that the wiring your guy did is lovely. Cheers to him and his fine work. Well, that's thanks to Sombat, who did all of our electrics. And for some of you out there, I know you've been asking about Sombat. He was the one that was in an accident on a boat. He got caught in an explosion.
Yeah.
And we ran a little campaign to help pay for his medical fees. We're happy to report he's made a full recovery and he's back at work.
Yeah, some scarring that will probably never go, but on the whole, he's pretty happy.
Frederick Rourke on YouTube asks, do you guys feel that you've completely rebuilt the boat at this point?
Yes. Yes, not a refit, a rebuild, I'd say. Right from the top of the mast to the bottom, everything is new. So she looks like a new boat. She feels like a new boat.
Jackie Greenlees, who started watching our channel during the original Refit series, she's been commenting quite frequently, so thank you very much for your feedback, Jackie. In fact, she's been answering other people's questions as well, so I appreciate that. But she did ask about the micro balloons. She said you didn't mention the balls you used in the filler when fairing the hull. These are the micro balloons, they're called micro balloons. It's essentially a powder that you add to your epoxy resin. We also added it to the West system, and that was the stuff you saw, which was like runny icing. It just makes fairing of epoxy that much easier. So thank you, Jackie, for mentioning that. We should have included that. Onto the subject that is on the tips of everyone's tongues. What did we do wrong? When they peeled back the GRP on the hull, you probably saw that they ground it back. They didn't use a proper GRP peeler, and that is because they actually didn't have the equipment. And towards the end of that 5 weeks of grinding, I remember one of the yard managers, saying to me, I guess we should buy a GRP peeler.
Yes.
Would have been much more efficient and saved a lot of man hours. Also on the hull, the swimming platform.
Yeah, the swimming platform, it's too low in the water.
Just a little bit too low.
A little bit too low. But the main problem is we use those beautiful planks, beautiful teak planks, took ages getting them just right. But the gaps between them is quite small. And when we are pounding, the strength of the sea has pushed them loose, and we've lost a couple of bolts.
Yeah, so we actually ended up taking the middle plank out so that there was less resistance in that water.
Yeah. So we should have used narrower planks and had wider gaps, and we could still do that.
We could do, yeah. Looking at the mast, I think we should have used more Tef gel on the stainless fittings on the aluminium mast. In particular, the little leads for the lines that go into the booms, there's a little bit of corrosion around there. I think at the time we couldn't actually get hold of Tef gel. That was one of the problems that we had.
Okay, the other thing was, of course, I didn't put non-skid. So I was in charge of the paint while Jamie's away, the final bit of the painting job, and we didn't put non-skid at the base of the mast, which was stupid. But at least we have granny bars.
We have granny bars, so it's not so bad. You may have noticed that the fair leads at each corner of the boat were mounted on teak blocks. This was to raise them up off the deck so they wouldn't rub on the edge of the boat. Well, what we did was we encased them in epoxy and then filled and faired them. So it's teak encapsulated inside these blocks. You have to be careful of this because if there is any way that moisture can get inside, it will rot from the inside. So really for those kind of fittings, you should leave your teak bare. But time will tell whether that's worked or not.
Yeah, when the lines fall off the back, we'll know.
Yes. And then the other thing was the tow rail. Now this is perhaps, in my opinion, this is probably the biggest mistake we made. As you know, we opted for a tow rail that was broken up and didn't think, but the very first break in the tow rail, where the first stanchion base is exactly where one of the forward port lights is. This means that when it rains, the water runs straight down
into my office, straight into my office. And in fact, it's not just that one, 2 or 3 of the others as well. So we didn't put the brakes in the right place, but we still love the tow rail and the whole look of it. Yeah. It's just that we didn't place it. So really, again, the only thing to remember is to close your office window when it rains. Yes, we discovered that the hard way. Now you saw that we removed the dorades. Now the main reason for this was to clear deck space. The reason why you have dorades and air vents is, of course, you can get moisture building up in the boat. But whilst you're in the tropics, the boat is open most of the time. Yeah. But we are planning to head north into colder climates, and I think possibly that dorade vent at the front of the boat might have been useful for that situation. So again, time will tell as to whether it was a bit foolish to get rid of that dorade vent or not. You saw in the refit that we used a brush stainless laminate effect in the galley. The reason for this is that we wanted this brush stainless look, but there was the weight issue. You also reckoned that it's quite hard to keep brush stainless clean. Yeah, because it shows all the stains and watermarks really quickly. Well, and then you admitted there's also a cost factor as well. I thought it was going to be more expensive, yeah.
The problem with this brushed stainless effect is that it has a kind of contoured finish. It's not smooth.
It's etched, so it kind of is, the idea is it looks like it's been brushed.
Yeah.
It's well done.
It looks good, but the problem is that it collects dirt and it's very, very difficult to clean. In fact, if you rub it with a green scourer, all that happens is the green bits of your scouring pad end up getting caught in this brushed stainless effect.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to manage, and I think we should have actually gone for proper stainless.
I agree, and I also think we should have done that with the countertops as well, because I'm not happy with that huge thick laminate we used. Again, I was being really tight on budget. We should have used a much better, it's just not strong enough, it's not good enough for all the cutting and the pounding and the banging.
It's strong enough.
It's discoloured.
It's discoloured, yeah, but it's also bubbled as well.
Yeah.
So we've got these little bubbles appearing on the laminate surface. Dave Marshall on YouTube, he said he would have recommended using copper instead for a warmer look, which I quite like the idea of. You don't?
No, I don't. No, I like the stainless look. I think for me, the lighting and the colour and everything was right. It's just the finish. So probably out of the whole boat, the galley is the place I'd want to do the most work right now. I want to change those countertops and I'd want to take that laminate out.
Just quickly, in the saloon, the ceilings look great.
They do.
But they are very wide, and because they run the entire length of the ceiling, they're huge. And we've had to take them down a few times to run electrical cables and things, and they're a bit of a pain in the arse. And in fact, on one of them, we've now had to screw it in because the Velcro wasn't strong enough to hold it up. It's worked quite well around the rest of the boat, but one or two boards were now screwed in. And I think eventually we will have to screw them all in.
Well, certainly when we go across the Pacific, they will all be screwed in.
Yeah.
They have to be, yeah, no doubt about that.
The recessed lights, we call them mood lights because, in my opinion, I don't think they show enough light for general living. You don't mind it so much, do you?
No, I don't like bright lights.
Yeah,
I think they're fine.
So what we've done now is, because we've got the lithium batteries, we're able to plug in two 40-volt energy-saving bulbs around the various sockets to provide, like for example, by my chart table, I find the ceiling light isn't bright enough.
Definitely your area, I agree, in the chart table area, but I think in the saloon, in the living area, you don't need a bright light, because I have a bright light in my office and you have a bright light. So I beg to differ on that one.
Jury's out on that one. Bayani Custodio on YouTube says, yay, a voltage regulator for the lighting. And Peter Kakandis says, one of my big projects will to be update my overhead lighting, so always interested in ideas. In the refit, we mentioned we put voltage regulators on each region, so we've got 4 regions of lights throughout the boat, and each one has one voltage regulator to keep the voltage at a constant 12 volts. Really what you should do with LED lighting is to put a capacitor on each light. This is recommended to give a much better regulation of that voltage. That's quite a big job, and we figured the voltage regulators would be good enough, and they have actually worked. I know people who were doing the same refit as us using similar lights, and their LEDs burnt out quite quickly because they didn't have those voltage regulators on them. But given the choice, go for capacitors instead. And the last thing in the saloon, of course, is that table, beautifully constructed. But it's held up on a single post, and because it's top heavy, that would be next to useless in rough weather. In fact, any kind of motion on the boat wouldn't be ideal.
The only time we ever use it, which isn't very often, is if we're at anchor, and then it's fine, but other than that we would never use it. But then again, it is quite good not to have it there when we're on passage.
That's true, yeah.
Because we've got plenty of places to hold on to. We don't need to hold on to the table.
And in fact, sometimes the table would get in the way when we're moving around. So again, we're not so bothered about that.
One thing with hindsight we would have done is to put a hard dodger on when we were at PSS.
I would go as far to say that we could have completely re-engineered the whole cockpit area to make it more like a traditional deck saloon oyster.
Yeah.
So we could have cut away at that cockpit, built it up a bit more, and made it more like a deck saloon. But of course, hindsight's a great thing. Back when we did the refit, we had no ideas of going north into colder weather, so the Dodger wasn't, top of mind at that time. Mark Lacey on YouTube says, one surprise was that you didn't get the engine out on a 12-month refit. And as you know, we had engine issues shortly after our refit. Mark, You're absolutely right.
100%.
We should have done that. There was no question about it. Perfect opportunity to do that.
And for those of you watching who don't know, we had to replace our engine, I think, 2 years later. So we now have a brand new engine. One other thing that strikes me is that has changed since the end of the refit is the upholstery. We put some great upholstery in, which we loved, and we selected carefully to make sure it was waterproof, everything proof, blah, blah, blah. But it was a beautiful pale blue, and 4 years on it was no longer beautiful pale blue. So that came out. We've now got new, more robust upholstery all over the boat. We had mood boards, so we used those quite a lot to communicate with the workers exactly what we wanted.
Compartmentalise, break down each job into smaller chunks so it's much easier to both physically and mentally manage.
Stay on top of the money, budget, budget, budget. Keep account of every single penny as you're spending it, and I would say try and pay that money every week so you don't get into big debt.
Yeah, in fact, Bob the Bomb on YouTube says, I've lived and worked in Southeast Asia for 20 years. Never pay a daily rate, supervise everything, buy materials yourself. And I would agree with 90% of that. Of course, we had to pay a daily rate because that was what we were having to pay through the boatyard for their employed staff.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. All the materials we either sourced ourselves or we sourced with the carpenters, for example. And he says, supervise everything. Cannot emphasize that enough. You have to stand over every person that's working on your project. They may be completely competent and know what they're doing, but they might have their own ideas about how the project should look when it's finished. So you need to make sure that you and your worker agree on what that final project is going to look like.
One of us was there every day.
Don't get distracted by additional jobs that are outside of your budget. Obviously, if you can afford to do them, but otherwise stick to those jobs that you originally planned to do.
Anything you take off the boat, label it, say what it is, and keep it safe somewhere.
Yeah, and in fact, you should be taking photos of everything, even take videos. Hey, why not start a Refit YouTube channel which starts with the recording of you ripping your boat apart? Very useful points of reference.
PN Westy on Patreon says, do you think the care in finish quality you guys experience with painters, carpentry, etc. is the standard, or did you feel like you lucked out? Personally, I think it's the standard. From what we've seen in plenty of other boats who've used our carpenters and other carpenters, it's pretty good here.
It is, but as we said earlier, you do need to manage them as well. Driftfish on YouTube says, how much could you rely on the expertise of the workers' knowledge and trust in their workmanship? Did you feel like you were micromanaging or fairly hands-off? I mean, it's human nature for people to cut corners. And if any of your workers can cut corners just to save a bit of time, they may well do that. So you do have to stay on top of that. But I don't think we lucked out. You know, no. we worked as hard managing these guys as they did actually working on the boat. And
in Thailand, wood is used a lot for everything in boats and on land. So carpentry is quite a common field to go down.
Another recommendation would be to familiarise yourself with foreign cultures and customs. You're working in their country, they may have different ways of approaching things, so try and understand their mindset as opposed to going in with your own mindset. And at the very least, try and compromise and meet in the middle somewhere.
Finally, take a break. Louis Lilienthal on YouTube says, when doing any large job like this, you must budget beer or you can lose your mind.
It's so true. We took a number of breaks. We took some weekend holidays. We took it in turns to go back to the UK to visit family. Very important to give yourself that mental break from the blood, sweat and tears of a complete rebuild.
One of my favourite breaks was when Gia, who's the general manager of the yard, took us overnight fishing, didn't he? We went
squid fishing.
Squid fishing, yeah, that was very exciting.
Yeah. Next up, we have the costs. Now, don't forget, this was done, of course, in 2014, 2015, so prices will have changed. We're going to give you the costs in sterling, and also a lot of the costs are on PSS's website. So we'll put a link in there for their website below, so you can go and check out some of the costs. On the whole, labour costs between £6 to £12 a day, depending on the skill set of each person working.
First off, the boatyard costs. Hard standing, 3,720, tent hire, 1,500, storage, 1,000, crane hire, 240, haul out, 200, giving a total of 6,660. Painting, including topsides, masts, booms, spinnaker poles, spreaders and various deck fittings, the labour was 6,400. Materials 4,725, including all grip top coat and primer, high build, geotomastic, micro balloons, as well as items like masks, respirators, gloves, paint suits, sandpaper, etc., giving a total of £11,125. Now on to deck fittings. To remove and replace them for labour and materials was a total of £1,700. Hull, including the osmosis treatment and the anti-fouling. Labour 2,000, materials 3,000, giving a total of £5,000. Carpentry, which was the biggest part of the job, was £11,500 for labour and £5,000 for materials, giving a total of £16,500. Electrics and electronics. Labour 1,000, we negotiated a fee for the job, and materials was 9,000, that includes the B&G products, giving a total of £10,000. Stainless work for labour and materials came to £4,000.
There were a number of miscellaneous costs as well within the yard. For example, we've got project management at £1,300, varnishing came to £4,000, some plumbing came to £50, general cleaning £150, the engine and shaft work came to £500, and the upholstery was £500, giving a subtotal of £6,500. And a grand total of, Liz?
I don't know, I've got to look down.
Oh, right, okay. I've forgotten as well.
A lot.
£61,485. There are, of course, some other costs to consider outside of the boat project itself. And these are general living costs, not to be discounted because they can add up.
Yes.
So we've got just the day-to-day living expenses, of course, your food and your travel. We rented scooters, so we were travelling from Satun town to the boatyard, which was 17 kilometres away. So both of us each had a scooter. Of course, when we're in Satun, we had to stay in a little apartment as well, so
yes.
we had to pay for that.
Yes.
And back in 2014, we had a one-bedroom bungalow that came to a staggering £80 a month.
Where we really won when it comes to cost was where we were. So in Satun it is pretty cheap to live, £1 a day for your lunches, and just generally really, really cheap compared to probably most other places in the world.
Guy Frawley on YouTube asks, do you feel that for the same quality and duration of your refit, it was more economic than, say, being carried out in Europe or the Med? This is the $64,000 question, and it's one that we have discussed with a lot of people, and we're still in disagreement on this. So, for example, I was talking to Barry, who did a refit in Krabi on a smaller scale, but it was still quite extensive. He's just bought a new boat based in New Zealand, and he argues that it is actually cheaper in the long run to get it done in New Zealand than it is in Thailand. He's been talking to someone based in New Zealand who's also doing a refit in New Zealand who lived in Thailand and is doing a comparison of costs. And he said the main reason for the difference is that in Thailand, the workers work at their own pace, whereas in New Zealand, they're much more efficient.
I'd argue that our refit was a rebuild, so it's difficult to compare it for that reason. But also I've had feedback from people like Kevin who say they cannot believe how cheap it is. Yeah. So the jury's out, unless you do exactly what we did in another country, it's difficult to really give an answer on that.
It's very
We're
difficult.
getting conflicting information.
I think another person left a comment saying there's absolutely no way you would be able to get the same standard of carpentry work in the US or the UK. And when you look at some of that carpentry work, it is exquisite, and you're paying £12 a day for that. So very, very difficult to quantify. I would say if we were to do another refit, I would have no qualms about going back to Thailand to do it again, to be honest.
we had, at that stage, we just had a regular income from our flat in the UK. We take rent from that. So we had a budget to work to each month, and it got progressively more and more difficult. It got to a stage where I was having sleepless nights, so we remortgaged the flat. It had been fully paid, so we took out a small mortgage on the flat to pay for the boat.
Also, that cost that we gave, the 60 odd thousand, in the UK that would probably pay for a very small extension on the back of your house to add a spare toilet or something. So again, that's the other way of looking at it. Esper is our home, and effectively we're remodelling a little bit of it, and it's the same as if you were to add an extension on your house.
Yeah. All of this information is available in our blog, and I'll put a link to the blog post here in the description. No Consent on YouTube asks, how long can you have the boat in Thailand when you do a refit? Normally, you can only have a foreign flag for a maximum of 6 months. Well, to be honest, that's not actually true. You get 6 months on arrival and you can extend for another 4 months very easily, no question asked. So that gives you 10. But if you're in a boat yard having work done in Thailand by Thai people, you can just keep extending the boat.
Yeah, and you do that by getting a letter of consent from the boat yard or the marina that you happen to be in, and you take that to customs, and that basically proves that you're staying in the country and spending money in the country, and they're quite happy to sign that off for you.
But you don't get, you only get 3 months, so we had to, every 3 months we'd have to go out and do a visa run. Was it worth it? There's a lot to say on that, and we did cover that in part 1, so go back to part 1 for the detail, but in short, yes, it was.
If you have any further questions, pop them in the questions below. If you've got any questions you'd like us to answer in detail, don't forget we have FTB Mates and of course our Patreon as well. So if you feel like supporting us, head on over to FTB Mates or Patreon, where we will answer your questions in full, one-to-one.
And actually, and only one, no, off, and only 7 thumbs down, and I think thumbs down.
Do you guys feel like you've completely rebuilt?
No.
No.
No.